we should always be grateful for the people who take time out of their days to check in to see how our day is going. It's an amazing thing, that is a sign that we're all connected. And that's true love. So it's nighttime here in Airdrie, and I thought I'd take a lovely twilight walk nearing dusk. And for those friends who are in Australia or in other regions, dusk is that magical time where it's neither totally light nor totally dark out. It's one of my favorite times, and thankfully where I am in southern Alberta, that can go quite late. So oftentimes dusk now around June is between 10 to 10:30. So it's I think around 9:30 now. And I wanted to describe some awesome synchronistic events. And so I am a woman of science. To give you a background, I completed my master's degree 2 years ago now, and I spent about 3 years doing it. So I have a master's degree in psychology, a behavioral science, a soft science. But in order to get that qualification, I did need to take a few research courses. So I am familiar with the scientific method, and I am familiar with all of the major founders of the different modalities and specific kind of ways of collecting data. Meta-analysis papers, so many papers. It was a good time. So I developed a real respect and real proficiency with kind of linear acquisition and organization, cataloging of knowledge. And this can be very helpful when you're appealing to a linear system of, let's say, matrices, which is primarily what we live in. We just live in a system that arbitrarily prioritizes and gives special treatment to people who are able to linguistically or behaviorally adhere to a very rigid set of standards based on the supposed reassurance of rational logic. But here's the thing. Rational logic in and of itself as a pure state of being is a little flawed. Because way back in about 1960s, 1970s, they discovered that humans actually have about 8 different types of intelligences. And the mainstream school system that we all know and exist in isn't actually based on measuring any of those intelligences except for one, and that's linear. And maybe physical kinetic intelligence if you count Jim. But for the most part, it's severely lacking in efficiency and in reliability. Talk about quantitative and qualitative unreliability. Number one, the curriculum's constantly changing. Number two, you're constantly mixing people with different levels of competency and skill acquisition and then you're trying to grade upon an average. Some kind of distorted bell curve happens, which unfortunately is often born of subjectivity in evaluation by teachers. The teachers themselves often don't have the skills or the ongoing training and support at a senior level to maintain their training and their objectivity. So you get things like stereotype threat happening, which is when a particular group, whether that be males, females, Asian kids, black kids, Aboriginal kids, whatevs, are treated differently without conscious knowledge of the people who are prejudging and discriminating against them. So you have an integrated system of privilege that gets carried on and carried on and carried on intergenerationally. That's not based on logic. It's not based on fact. It's based on pure unadulterated fear. So, fear is the most powerful emotion in the human brain. It shuts all higher processes down, except for one other emotion. And unfortunately, it's the emotion that gets trampled down most by this kind of normative insistence on performance only instead of being. And this other super powerful emotion is love. And this is what, this is not a new idea by any means. This is what, so-called radicals or different intellects and activists were all talking about in the 70s. It's how I got to go to work every day. It's how we got weekends off. Is by realizing that we're more than just number crunching machines. That we actually have all these additional needs that make us equally valuable and human. And by attempting to excise these aspects of ourselves, say the emotion aspect, the physical aspect, the spiritual aspect, and we only focus and prioritize on the mental aspect, we destroy ourselves. Slowly but surely we do. We kind of cut our noses off to spite our faces often by our obsession with linear intelligence. And this kind of preference for linear intelligence methods and communication are closely linked to materialism, capitalism, and kind of a masculinized view of the world. And what that means in terms of like Vedic and Taoist and Buddhist thought, what is masculinized energy? Well, it's the energy of doing. We must do in order to find relief. We must do in order to solve a problem. We must do. So, funnily enough, there is a stage in psychological development before empathy is developed. And there's about 3 different areas. And one is called where you must do something in order to feel emotional relief, no matter what it is, just any doing thing. Theological thinking. So I must do. Then there's emotional equivalency, which is the second, which is I feel bad, therefore this is a bad situation, therefore everyone else must believe that this is bad or else they don't know the reality. They're crazy. So again, very limited. And the last form is so with that kind of mentality, not only do we deny our own existence, we also deny our own worth, because that's essentially who we are. And so we remove ourselves from the connection with others, the great oneness that we're all part of. And oftentimes people's ears shut down at this point because I've used the term oneness. And unfortunately, through religious indoctrination and through the cruelties of the church in various different communities around the world, this idea of oneness has been polluted. And that was a deliberate infiltration. That isn't something accidental. And it is something to be very agitated by. I'm quite enamored with the project and the dedicated intention to eradicating this fallacy that everything to do with oneness or acknowledging our connection is fraudulent or a wolf in sheep's clothing or borderline abusive, because that is unfortunately what the organizations of religious authority have done deliberately. And there's all kinds of fantastic theories on there about how this has occurred. And personally, I think that it's the people that we are encouraged to love and to attach to most consistently who are the ones most liable for abuse. So essentially what's happening is a lot of corporations, a lot of mainstream religious authorities are kind of bogarting love and manipulating it falsely into this kind of earned love, conditional love. You must memorize these passages, you must attend this thing on this day, you must believe in this particular script in order to be loved. And this is so awful and false and abusive. This is essentially kind of a pattern of violence that I see a lot. So one of the greatest manifestations of my life is being able to do what I was put here to do, be able to do what I love to do, and that is to work as a psychotherapist in the field of domestic violence and mental health. And I'm incredibly happy and I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to do this work, because I had to study power theory in order to get good and effective at my job. And so when you understand power theory and when power goes wrong, and when people become abusive, take everything from Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment to MK Ultra to whatever, I just use the theory in a micro way. So it's easy for me to see power running amok and the abuse within our systems in a macro way because of that knowledge. So I'm really, really blessed. I was also blessed with a fantastic father who was very ingenious and innovative, and he was always inspiring me to think of ways to do things better, more efficiently. So combined with that, and my mom's influence. So my mother was a radical feminist. Before becoming a radical feminist was cool. My mom was the ultimate hipster feminist. No, she wasn't. But she was always taking me to these protests and these marches, and she was always encouraging me to use my voice and speak out. So my mom, she was very verbose. She was very aggressive and very confident. And like a lot of second wavers, she revolted and repelled a lot of conventional feminine dress and feminine associations. She always cut her hair, and she always encouraged me not to wear makeup. Not to wear makeup, screw the man. You know, and she kind of raised me with very, you know, traditionally masculine characteristics. So when I'm giving a presentation, my number one thing is performance. The soundness of my ideology. The concreteness of the doing, right? The masculinized materialism. I have to prove my case effectively. So that's what I'm really thinking of. So I've never really been too impacted by anxiety surrounding how other people perceive my appearance. And so I think that's been a huge advantage. I'm the youngest member of my team. I'm also one of the members with the highest caseload and the highest success rate. And the reason why I'm able to do that is pretty much because of my upbringing. At the same time, when I was being brought up, the emphasis was on women being taken seriously, but we have nothing to prove. We should be taken seriously just because we exist, just because, of course, we're equal and we have great, fantastic ideas. But my mom and my dad were trying to prepare me to be able to survive in a very crooked world where they knew that I wouldn't be taken seriously, and I had to outperform almost every man and woman I encountered in order to be taken seriously. A lot of people in my generation, the millennials, are scrambling to find consistent work. Many of them don't have benefits. Many of them can't afford to invest in their financial security. Essentially, they're glorified slaves working in retail jobs at the mercy of large corporations. And I managed to escape that based on my very fortunate exposures. And like Malala says, I'm no better, I'm no different, I'm no more intelligent, I'm no more capable. And I am no greater than anyone else. The only difference is my exposures. And I had a father who may have been absolutely emotionally unavailable to me, but attempted to compensate through encouraging me to learn how to teach myself almost anything. So my dad was a huge academic, and he didn't have 5 degrees. He only had 2 master's degrees. But with those 2 master's degrees, he was able to learn most anything. Electronics, programming, building small robots. And through his influence, I was able to understand that, okay, yeah, it's limitless. Sky's the limit. So that's how I started getting involved in film production and in writing and acting and directing, and the part that was missing when I was growing up, and the part that attracted me into the field I now work full time, of course, part-time musician, part-time director, part-time filmmaker, is the absence of emotional intelligence. So my parents were brilliant people, but devastated by low self-esteem, devastated by intergenerational trauma. Both of my parents, they had parents and grandparents who died in the war or were tortured by the war. My grandmother had PTSD, where she would flinch at the slightest noise because she remembered the sound of the Blitz bombs coming down in Bristol when she was a young girl. So that trickles down, and that continues to affect people. And so I really cared about my parents. I loved them dearly, but when I would try and connect to them in a loving way that most artists and creative people instinctively know how to do, they would feel so uncomfortable and so afraid. Wow, that's lucky. Hey, buddy. That's right there. They'd be so afraid of that intimate connection that they would immediately just shut it down. And it wasn't that they intentionally were being heartless. It wasn't like they were intentionally trying to hurt me. But of course, those things happened. Those things affected me and my self-concept and my own self-esteem. They did the best they could with what they knew how to do, with what they had. And so I instinctively, as a kid, I had a lot of this information. I had a lot of this kind of like sensory consciousness, this kind of awareness that, of course, in our current world and with my upbringing and my parents' insistence on linear proving constantly, I couldn't possibly prove. I was a kid. Even if I had the language, like, they probably wouldn't have bought it. It would have just seemed so outlandish to them. Because when someone is in an intense grief response or a depression state, any kind of unveiling of another state of being seems ludicrous. It just seems so unlikely, so improbable. Why would they invest in something that they don't know already? They know misery. They know pain very well. So sometimes it's very frightening at the prospect of exiting that looping of experience of hardship and heartache. And so now more and more data is coming out to back up the theory that most, psychics or intuitives or kind of out there counselors have been working on for years, and that is when there is prolonged, painful exposure, untreated trauma, untreated mental illness, untreated addictions, over the course of, say, 5 to 25 years, absolutely, that's going to shut your heart down. That's going to shut your pancreas down. That's going to shut your liver down. That's going to shut your kidneys down. That's going to create holes in your brain. That's going to contribute to dementia and Alzheimer's. And so it is ethical for us to treat these problems just as thoroughly and with just as much investment and vivacious dedication as the cardiologists among us or the brain surgeons among us. So what we would invest in those treatments, which are often, post-operative, we could be a lot more efficient and effective in our time if we actually created a society that encouraged people to value love and value their ability to love more than their ability to produce or to prove their worth. Because people are worthy inherently. People don't need to prove anything to anybody. They're just worthy, simply for existing. Your worthiness is innate. You were born, therefore you are of worth. So, this is my lovely quiet town. I'll leave you with that. You are no better or worse than anyone else who's ever existed. You are no more or less deserving of love and respect than anyone who's ever lived. And I'm incredibly happy as a domestic violence counselor, which often astounds people, and including members of my own team and my own manager. But this is a true thing. This is our truth as a collective human body. It's good to just call spades spades. And then when you are able to identify the problem, you can very quickly generate solutions and begin to apply them. And I think there's more and more of a global consciousness forming where that's more feasible than ever before. We just have to remember to engage with the light, and to not be seduced and tempted by greed, by avarice, by sexual conquest, and to remember the 4 fours. So the 4 fours, kind of like fight, flight, or freeze, except there's one more. So there's fight, there's flight. Oh, remember, it's 5 fours. There's fight, flight, freeze. There's also feeding. Feeding as a survival mechanism when we're feeling stressed out, overwhelmed, where we just, essentially that's like eating, emotional eating, to compensate for our emptiness, our hollowness of existence, of taking up space with meaning, with substantive, high frequency exchange with others. We use food to replace connection. And the last one is fornication. We use burping. We use a lot of sex, especially now with the hookup culture. Oh my goodness, this is becoming like the go-to next to fighting, next to the violence that we're seeing. It's sex. It's just meaningless, oftentimes heartless sex, and so. You can't expect yourself to thrive off of Big Macs every day. And that's essentially what's happening. We're just feeding each other Big Macs. I mean, that shit ain't good for you. That shit's gonna shut your system down pretty fast. Then you're gonna come in and maybe you're thinking of killing yourself, or maybe you really want to kill your ex-boyfriend or your ex-girlfriend, or you really want to kill your boss because he's just been riding you for so long. You like to use that language too, the language of abuse and of rape culture and of pornography. You call women bitches, they're just liars and manipulators, because then you don't actually have to look at yourself. So, or vice versa. You call all men rapists, and they're all just a bunch of apes and blah blah blah. So, I mean, it's terrible. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he'd gone and lived in India, and one of the traditional practices over there in college and universities is you don't date anybody you're in college with. You don't date like a classmate at your school. You date someone outside your school. And all the members of the opposite sex, and of course same sex, you have like these friendship bracelets, essentially, very similar to that concept. They're called like sisterhood or brotherhood promises. And so they wrap them around their wrists, and they're made of threads, and it's like a solidarity thing. Like, it's okay and it's normal to have a platonic relationship with somebody that you might find attractive, but wouldn't be in your best interest to actually have sex with. It happens. And that's the only way you're actually going to learn the skills to be a good lover, to be a good partner, to be a good wife, a good husband, eventually, when you're ready for that, is if you learn how to be a good friend to someone that, of course, you might have attraction to, but learning restraint, learning how to wait, learning kindness, learning prioritization of the other person's needs as well as your own, learning how to meet your own needs before you begin to try to meet anyone else's, and learning how to meet your own needs before expecting anyone else to meet you. So, it's a beautiful life. Keep living it up. Surround yourself with loving, kind people that don't make you feel heavy in your stomach. That's very important. Know that you are not crazy for sensing your environment through nonlinear intelligence, okay? Know that there's all kinds. There's spatial, there's emotional, there's intrapersonal, there's interpersonal. Oh, it's wonderful. So be good to yourself, be kind. If you find yourself neglecting yourself, do one thing, just one thing to completion for yourself without reporting it to anybody. One day. And a lot of times people ask me, well, why can't I tell people about what I've done for myself? Well, I'll tell you. Because you don't need any external validation to meet your own needs. You can just thrive on internal validation. And that is how you build a tremendous resilience and welcoming nature towards quiet, towards stillness, and the the nice full emptiness between people. So say you build some competency at this, with your ability to actually be fully with yourself, no matter what thoughts might enter your head, what emotions might enter your body, what physical sensations might happen to you. That's going to make it so much easier and so much more fulfilling when you're with somebody, because you're going to have that capacity for unconditional love and tenderness and connection without saying a word, without demanding anything from them, because you know how to meet your own needs. And so when you know how to meet your own needs, it's very, very easy for you to be willing to meet the needs of others without feeling exploited, without feeling used. And at the same time, if someone is genuinely exploiting you, and it's not just fear talking in your mind, but they're genuinely exploiting you, hey honey, I want to go to Vegas, can you lend me like $800? Can you buy me all this stuff? Can you look after all my dogs for like a month while I go to Japan? And I'm not going to help you with anything in return. You're going to be able to identify that and be able to put a healthy boundary in place and say, I don't feel comfortable with this. And I really appreciate the time we spent together. And I have to be there for myself as well as you. I care about you, but I don't feel comfortable with this, and I need you to change. If you don't feel comfortable changing, I'm sorry, I wish you love. I can't be in a relationship with you. With ease. It will be much easier. And I speak from personal experience. So in the coming weeks, I will kind of go more into that. But for now, I wish you a lot of love and hope you enjoyed this little walkabout in my little town. My little town of Airdrie, full of air and Nose Creek. Boop, boop. Oh, there's some... Ooh, nope. Yes. Moon and Jess say goodbye. Goodbye.
I am a traveler of both time and sun burns the ground. And my eyes filled with sand as I scan this wasted land. Trying to find where I be. Oh, I love the storm who leaves no trace, like thoughts inside a dream.